I have a little bit of an interesting relationship with the Nissan Altima, mostly for the fact that I came home from the hospital in its predecessor, the Nissan Stanza. The Stanza very quickly went away in the United States in the early 1990s and was replaced by the Altima nameplate that was initially a Datsun by Nissan or Nissan by Datsun Altima or whatever. But in any case, it's been 30-some years. The Altima is still here and enduring as a nameplate, and I've got the latest one here with me. I want to talk all about what the 2023 Nissan Altima is, and I want to talk a little bit about the energy that comes with it and kind of the stereotypes, because I don't think they're necessarily worth as much memeage and hate and vitriol as some people kind of spew toward this poor family sedan. So, with all that, this is Out Motorsports, the channel for cars as you are. My name is Jake, and this is the 2023 Nissan Altima SR VC Turbo. Let's talk all about what this thing is, what the energy is around it, why I think it's kind of misplaced sometimes, and then of course we'll get it out on the road and talk all about how it is to drive. All right, so what is the 2023 Nissan Altima? Well, this is the same generation of Altima that came out first in 2018. Nissan did make a few changes for 2023 that are worth talking about. It's why they have one here for us to drive and discuss and review. Most notably, the changes come in the form of styling updates. They got a new front end going on, kind of better reflects their updated design language. They added their new refined Nissan logo to the nose and the rest of the car. And then inside, they now offer a 12-inch touchscreen for their central infotainment that mirrors that of the Nissan Armada and a lot of their other products that are getting the same sort of system. So that's kind of the differences for 2023. Otherwise, this is the same Altima that everyone has known and loved and talked about on the internet for a long time at this point. Now this one, like I said, is that SR with the VC turbo engine. It's a turbocharged 4-cylinder that makes 236 horsepower and 267 pound-feet of torque. It's an interesting engine technically in that VC means variable compression. So there's actually this little mechanical system going on that can change the compression ratio of the engine based on your throttle inputs and how hard you're driving it. And that means you can have a lot of power or a lot of fuel economy because the engine doesn't have to work nearly as hard. Change the compression ratio, that is great. Now, it's very technically cool. This engine first debuted on a few Infiniti models because Infiniti is Nissan's luxury sister, and they put it in the Altima. And what's interesting here is that the Altima is also offered as an all-wheel drive sedan. This one, though, being the turbo, is only front-wheel drive. And that is a little bit of a weird setup to me, given you've got much more power and torque with the turbo motor versus the naturally aspirated 4 that's going to be in the bulk of these cars. And the reason for that, as indicated by a friend and follower of the channel, who's a mechanic for these cars, he said that where the variable compression actuator sits on the engine actually takes up some space that an all-wheel drive transfer case would need to take up to give this car all-wheel drive. So that is why the turbo cars are only front-wheel drive. Now, regardless of which engine you get and how many drive wheels you have, you are only going to have a continuously variable transmission on your 2023 Altima. That has kind of been a staple, a hallmark of Nissan for at least a decade at this point, especially with the Altima. They used to offer these with a 6-speed manual transmission, or I guess it was a 5-speed earlier than that, and those were like true hot girl Altimas. In like early 2000s, you could get that big 3.5 liter VQ V6, a 6-speed manual, and that was like a cool car. That was really neat. Now, Nissan, of course, shifted a little bit away from that like hot girl moment, like I'm just going to use that term, and they went a little more mainstream with their Altima starting about 2013 to where you could only get that CVT. Most of them were going to be 4-cylinders. They still had some V6s, but they went a little more just kind of typical family sedan and a little bit more away from that enthusiast angle with this car in particular. Now, the SR with the turbo is supposed to be the sportiest variant of Altima for 2023, so I wouldn't say Nissan's going back toward like attracting the enthusiast market, but they're sure trying. They're at least doing something to kind of go up against like the Camry TRD, but not entirely. What you do get beyond the turbo motor is some revised sport suspension. The sway bars are going to all be the same across all Altimas, so basically they either updated the shock valving or changed the spring rates or both. I did reach out to Nissan to confirm what they did. Didn't hear back by the time I filmed this, but I'll put some text below if they confirm it by the time I edit this whole thing. So they did do that with the suspension. They say they've got some sport seats inside, which we'll show you in just a second, and you've got some 19-inch wheels with a 235 millimeter wide all-season Hankook tire. So there's nothing really sporty about this other than the fact that it's got more horsepower, but it is at least and effort. I like the fact that they offer the turbo motor if you want a sedan like this and you want a little more punch and power out of it. Now, we do have to talk about this Altima Energy, and we have to talk about how this car came to be with me in the first place, because I requested this. And an Altima is not necessarily something you would see on our channel. You know, we tend to focus more on like things that tow and sporty fun stuff, and this is respectfully kind of neither of those. But I realized we had this Altima in the DC area, and I reached out to Nissan and I said, hey, I would like to spend some time with this and get to know it a little bit better. And normally when I do that for a manufacturer and I say, hey, do you have this vehicle? Can I spend a week with it? The response is some sort of, sure, we'll get you scheduled in it. And when I reached out to Nissan about this, the first email I got back was, hey, great to hear from you. What's your coverage plan with this car? Which means, what are you going to be talking about? Because we know there's a little bit of a reputation, and we know people like to just rag on the Altima as being that car that goes 300 miles an hour with, you know, trim hanging off of it and no headlights, down the shoulder with the hazards on. And they do have that energy and stigma. And if you've been around cars and on or near the internet in the last 10 years, you've kind of picked up on that, I'm sure. But I requested this because sedans are, you know, shrinking in volume for how many are available. And I think this Altima gets a little bit of an unfair rep just because of some unsavory owners who are, you know, more visible than a lot of other people. So I did want to just spend some time with it and just kind of see what's what with a new Altima, because it's this, it's the Camry, it's the Accord, it's the Sonata, and it's kind of the Malibu, if anyone remembers that Chevy makes it, including Chevy. So if you want an average, you know, affordable, reasonable family sedan, and you're a sedan person, this is one of very few on the list here, so might as well be worth checking out. So with that, let's show you a couple quick things inside, because I mentioned there are those seats, there's that updated infotainment, and then let's get this Altima out on the road and talk all about how it is to drive, because I have a lot of theories. So a couple quick things about the interior. Like I mentioned, the biggest notable upgrade to the interior of the Altima for 2023 is going to be this infotainment screen. So this is a new 12.3-inch widescreen unit that replaces like an 8-inch system that they had before. The smaller system is still going to be standard on the lower trims. This is one of your top options, but this is a nice system. It is running newer software than I've seen on other Nissans that have this size screen, so I'm sure that will propagate throughout the rest of their lineup, but it's pretty snappy, it's easy to use, wireless CarPlay, wireless Android Auto, which I love to see. There's a wireless charging mat right here, and then a USB-C and USB-A as well in front of the shifter. Other things that are kind of notable in here, like I said, these seats are allegedly a little bit different for the sake of being the SR model. And for 2023, you've got contrasting stitching going on that's kind of orange and white with some orange inlays in the middle of the seats. It's a good look. It's kind of interesting. I think it pairs nicely, especially to the dark blue paint on this car. So that is a nice little touch. Now the steering wheel is also going to be a flat bottom steering wheel, which I find a little amusing, but it sets a nice tone. It gives you something, a little more personality going on in here than what they could have otherwise. So it's a nice steering wheel, nice hard buttons to use. You don't have to, you know, deal with like haptic buttons or anything. So nice design, easy steering wheel. It does have paddle shifters that you can use to control the CVT if you really want to, but we'll talk about this in the driving portion. I don't know how much it really matters for the most part. Other interesting thing going on in here that I wanted to talk about in particular, because this being the sporty one, I just found this interesting. There's no drive mode toggle, if you will. There's no button that says sport. There's no button that says eco. There's none of that. And with your shifter, you've just got drive and L for low, which will put the CVT in a very low ratio for like extended downhill, you know, descents or whatever. But I was talking to my friend Nick, who has a lot of experience in fleet management. He's dealt with a lot of these Altimas since they came out in 2018. And he goes, hey, there's a little spot on the shifter with a little line that doesn't look like anything but a design element. Push it. It's actually a button, and that is actually your sport mode selector. So very fascinating. It's interesting that they kind of hid this in here, but that's where your sport mode is for your Altima, and that is the same no matter which engine you have. That is going to be your sport mode toggle. So with all that, let's get behind the wheel and talk all about how this Altima is to drive, because that is what I'm here for, and that is why I pitched this to Nissan and why they sent this car to me. So let's get into that. All right, so I've got my shifter in sport, and we're going to talk about driving the 2023 Nissan Altima. So first things first, we'll talk about kind of the basics of like highway type driving, because that's where these are going to be driven a lot, where, you know, road trips and commutes and all that. And for the sake of highway driving, this is a very pleasant car. The ride quality in particular, I think, is very good. I had a couple friends with me. We all appreciated the ride quality. Even being on the sport suspension with the 19-inch wheels, you know, shorter sidewall tires and everything, it is still a good ride. It's pretty compliant. It's well controlled. It is a little soft, so you do get some body roll. It's not the sportiest thing in the world, but it's appropriate for what the car is trying to be. So the ride quality is really good. The seats are also very comfortable, although we really did wish for some deeper thigh cushions on the fronts, because for if you're, you know, taller and you've got a longer leg, the cushion is a little short for those of us with longer legs. The other nice thing in here is the sound system. It's a Bose sound system on this particular model. It's a 9-speaker setup. It's a little bass heavy, but it is generally pretty impressive. And then finally, visibility in here is pretty good. Looking out the front, you've got a nice low dash. Even with the new 12-inch infotainment, nothing's like up in your face and blocking your view. So you've got nice, you know, 180-degree visibility out here. And then that all pairs to Nissan's Pro Pilot Assist, which is their driver assistance system that's got the typical, you know, blind spot monitoring, radar cruise, lane centering, all that good stuff. And it actually works pretty well even in heavy traffic. It brings you to a stop really nicely if you're approaching stop traffic, not real jerky or anything. So generally pretty impressive as like a kind of, you know, average quiet commuter type car. I understand why people like these. From a driver's car perspective and just how this thing is to hustle a little bit more, you'll notice I'm hustling on some back roads. I didn't want to do this video only in like the city or in a highway environment, because really, you know, you see these people weaving through traffic, and I'm sure Nissan hates that I'm going back to the stereotype, but like you see people driving these a little bit like maniacs sometimes, and the question is why? And I think if the car is confidence inspiring, if it handles well, I mean, that's ultimately a good thing, right? Because you don't see people doing this in like Kia Optimas. So I wanted to bring it out and feel it on back roads and talk about the handling and the suspension. Suspension, like I said, is a little soft for the sake of overall like body roll and things, but it's fairly confidence inspiring no matter what. And the steering is also pretty confidence inspiring. I'm not, of course, going wild here on these roads, but this is easy to drive in a somewhat spirited manner. The chassis is willing to rotate. It's a little soft, but you've got some steering feel. It will turn in and go, and you can make it pivot just a tiny bit if you really try. So it's interesting to me, because this is actually like fun for what it is for this kind of car, this class of car, you know. The suspension's not adaptive or anything, it's just fixed rate damping, but it is very confidence inspiring as a handling sort of vehicle. Now I want to talk about power and sound and throttle here, and first I'm just going to start off by giving it foot to floor. So you hear that CVT kind of doing its thing. It's imitating gear changes, and I'm in regular drive now, not sport, but it tries its best to be not a CVT. But when you're just kind of driving it normally, it does a really good job at being a CVT. And I think that also contributes to the driving Altimas quickly sort of meme, because the CVT does a good job at keeping the engine low in the revs. I think in the turbo model in particular, it does a nice job because it can use the turbo to help out with torque. But it wants to be unobtrusive, so it's trying to keep you at like 2,000 RPM at the most, and really the ratio spread is so crazy that you could be doing 30 miles an hour or 70 miles an hour and the car is sitting mostly at 2,000 RPM the whole time, and it's fairly quiet in here, so you don't really have a great sense of speed unless you're flooring it. And then you get the noise and the fake gear shifts and all that. But if you're not doing that, you really don't entirely know how fast you're going. And that is compounded with a gas pedal or a throttle pedal that has a lot of dead space when you're leaving a stop. So when you first push the pedal down, the first maybe half inch or inch of travel that it's got has really laggy, slow response. And I think they're doing it for the sake of fuel economy to try and, you know, get the EPA numbers up. But that means most drivers are going to either accelerate slowly, or they're gonna just put their foot in it more and then go faster everywhere. And not a bad thing, but when you combine that with a chassis that is confidence-inspiring and steering that is fairly predictable and confidence-inspiring and all of these things, and then you have no sense of speed because the car's quiet and the CVT keeps you at 2,000 RPM no matter what you're doing, I think it's very easy to see why these get driven quickly, like more than an Accord or a Camry or an Optima or whatever, because just the formula kind of works. And it's honestly a good thing to me. It's kind of a nice car to just casually fling around on these little back roads, and I'm having a actually pleasant enough time doing it. The amusing thing with all of this that I find truly kind of funny, the speedometer on this car, let's go through this. Whee! Did a nice job right there. Like, this is easy to just kind of hustle around with no drama. But the amusing thing with all of this, the speedometer in here goes to 180 miles an hour in a Nissan Altima. And I want to know in what world some product planner was figuring out the speedometer in this car and said, yeah, 180 is the good upper limit of what we're going to mark on the dial. And they're not doing it for the sake of kilometers an hour if you're in other markets, because they have a separate kilometers per hour gauge that goes, higher than 180, because 180 kilometers an hour is like, what, 110 in miles per hour. And so overall, this is an interesting car for me to be driving because, like I said, I requested it. It's not something I would normally want to drive because, like, there's not really anything super sporty or sexy or enthusiasty about an Altima, despite this one having the turbo. The days of the hot girl car Altima, the ones with the VQ and the 6-speed manual, those are long gone. We're not getting those cars back. But I was just so curious to see, because my entire theory with this car, which has been proven correct now, is that if it is confidence inspiring in how it drives, that is why people will drive them in the way that they do, versus something that is just as ultimately boring. Like, no shade to Nissan, but no one's getting that excited about a midsize sedan with a CVT and an open differential. But, this is quiet, it handles well, it has adequate power, it puts it down nicely, and most impressively, it wants to turn. So when you're on these back roads, it's confidence inspiring, and that's a good thing. So I think the memes, yes, like, no one wants to be seen as the brand that has the cars that people drive poorly and cause issues in, but if you dissect that a little bit more, this is actually somewhat impressive as far as how it drives for what it is. This is not the next like BMW 5 Series Slayer, not in any way, but I'm having a plenty nice time driving on these back roads. I wouldn't even say this is encouraging me to do a little more, but the car is just playful enough and just responsive enough that even with the CVT kind of actively keeping the man down and keeping the engine from revving too high, I'm comfortable carrying speed. I'm comfortable turning in and braking. The brakes have a nice initial bite. The pedal feel is good all the way through the travel. It's a little soft, but that's okay. But it wants to rotate just a little bit. It's all pretty pleasant. That's it for this review of the 2023 Nissan Altima SR with the VC Turbo 4-cylinder engine. As always, thank you so much for coming along. Please be sure to like, share, comment, subscribe right here on YouTube. Give us a follow on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Out Motorsports if you want to see what we're up to in between filming and editing all these great videos. And if you'd like to join a growing community of LGBT automotive enthusiasts and motorsports competitors, head over to outmotorsports.com. We've got a whole community over there of people who would love to be your new best friend. We're hosting events both online and in person throughout the rest of this year and into 2024. We'd love to have you join for any and all of those. Till next time, please stay safe, be well, and see you again soon.